Hello and welcome to your session with Bryony October, who's going to be talking to you about her career as a live sound engineer. We hope you enjoy today's session and get us involved in the whole week as much as possible. We really want you to share your week with us by posting your photos to your social accounts using the hashtag IW22. If you tag Confetti on Instagram and Twitter, you'll be entered into the Industry Week 22 photo competition. The best photos will be voted for by you and the winner will bag a £50 Amazon voucher. Don't forget, you can still book onto upcoming events by going to iw.confetti.ac.uk. Make sure you sign in using your Confetti or NTU email address and make sure you have the Zoom app installed in advance. You can also check out previous year's talks and masterclasses on the on-demand section of the website. Finally, if you're currently in your final year of an undergraduate course, it's worth noting that the NTU employability team are offering extra careers coaching appointments next week to help you get ready for your next steps. Look on the employability learning room for more information. You've all been asked to submit questions in advance and we'll get through as many of those as we can. I've got Darren Harding sat over to my left over here who's going to be feeding some of those questions in. There he is. So if there's still time, we can take some live questions on the Zoom call as well. So let's not delay any further. Today's talk is with Bryony October. She's one of the highest rated female live sound engineers in the UK, worked up to stadium level, often combining front of house sound, tour and production management with a long list of major artists, including Laura Marling, Noisettes, Foxes, Billy Ocean, Katie Melua and the British female country duo Ward Thomas. So please join me in virtually welcome Bryony October. Hi Bryony.
Hi there, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. And you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm
good.
Here sitting in Shaw's headquarters actually for a International Women's Day event here.
Excellent. So you've got a day of sort of interviews and panels and chats and all that kind of stuff. Great. I mean, I don't profess to be any kind of Michael Parkinson or anyone like that, but so our chat may go all over the place today. But we've got a few questions just to go through, and I'll start very kind of unoriginally by asking where it all started for you. Whereabouts did you start in the industry, and how did it all kick off?
Long time ago, back in the days before social media, Zoom, Facebook, any of that stuff, bands had fan clubs which you paid a subscription to join and you get a magazine or a free official t-shirt or maybe a rare recording on a tape or eventually CD. And my favourite band when I was a teenager was the Levellers, who were big enough to have headlined Glastonbury in about 1994, long before probably anyone here was born. But I wrote to their fan club when I was 15 and asked if I could do my schoolwork experience at their fan club offices down in Brighton. I lived in Cambridge, but my uncle lived in Brighton. I didn't post the letter because I was too embarrassed. I thought it was, you know, everything's embarrassing when you're a teenager. I thought it was too embarrassing to ask the Levellers to do my work experience there. So I wrote the letter and I sat on it, and my mum posted it without telling me. So they immediately wrote back to me and said, yeah, absolutely, come down for a week. You can work in the fan club, you can pack t-shirts into envelopes and you can see what it's all about. They actually did have a recording studio at that at the same kind of, they have like a place called the Metway, which is their kind of headquarters, or was. I mean, they've still got it, but it's obviously not as with the modern day, it's not as, there's no fan club as such. But anyway, so I went down there for a week, very, very nervous, met all my heroes in that week, packed lots of t-shirts into envelopes, and knew from that moment that I wanted to work in, you know, with music. Even though I was only packing t-shirts, I said to myself, I don't care if I only pack t-shirts forever, I just want to be part of this. But subsequently they asked me if I would go on tour and be the merchandise assistant, which the main merchandise person had somebody to boss around finally, being perceived as lowest in the pecking order. And he said to me, you have to go and sit with the t-shirt boxes when they load in at 9 a.m. and wait for me there until I come in at 3 to set the merchandise stall up. So I did that for precisely one day, after which I was very bored, and I said to the front of house engineer, I said, can I help? Can I help in any way? Because I'm not going to just sit here. And that got me loading PA in, helping set the PA up, and then I badgered him until he let me start helping to mix the support bands, which has obviously led to me meeting a lot of young up-and-coming bands and then being taken out on tour.
That's amazing, because it kind of shows, I mean, you think it's easy to reach out to bands and things now, but to have just taken the idea of just writing a letter and seeing what would happen, even though you didn't post it, but obviously it got to them, and the fact they replied really quickly is just surely a sign that that's kind of the way, you know, you can just approach these people and, you know, they are contactable and stuff. So
yeah, absolutely.
it kind of worked out, yeah. So I found on some of the interviews and stuff that I read through that you did a music technology as part of an A-level, or was it an A-level sort of subject?
Yeah, so again, this is in the 90s. Music technology wasn't an A-level when I, it was, I think it was its second year of being an A-level. So kind of early on, we didn't really have a teacher for it. There was a teacher for the first term of the first year. Then they couldn't find somebody. So we went back into the full music A-level. Then we popped out into the module in music technology. It was all a bit shambolic, and it certainly didn't inspire me with confidence. I think, I mean, I was the only girl on the course as well, which when you're 17 years old is kind of quite hard work. It didn't instill me with great confidence. It was only once I went to university, not to do anything to do with them. You couldn't do the degrees you can do now. You know, I did a degree in, I think it was like critical theory and philosophy or something, you know, heavyweight like that. But I went to Freshers Week and I immediately saw the for tech crew, and it was the environment I'd been around with the levelers building PA. So I joined the tech crew at Student Union, and that got me some kind of like non-pressured hands-on time on there. They had a really nice like old turbo sound flash and flood rig with Soundcraft desks at both ends and all the microphones you'd want to play with, but they never had any bands on because it had kind of shifted to being DJ world. It was kind of late 90s, early noughties, and it was much cheaper for them to put DJs on in the Student Union, and there just wasn't the appetite for live bands like there had been in the kind of 80s and early 90s. So I had a lot of time just sitting fiddling around with the desk whilst babysitting a stereo mix of a DJ, basically, which was really very useful in supplementing what I was already learning when I was out on tour. Because I managed to combine, because I was by this point I was touring with the levelers from before I did my A levels even, but I managed to get through uni kind of more for my parents than for myself. But I managed to keep touring because I'd also then picked up merchandise selling work with Travis and Ash, who were obviously both quite big bands in the late 90s as well. So I managed to tour and do my degree at the same time.
I think I probably did a similar A-level thing to you. We had black and white Cubase on like old Atari Falcon computers.
Cubase.
Yeah. And it was basically, we had to copy a piece of sheet music, I remember, note by note into like notation straight into Cubase, and that was our A-level or AS level.
And make it sound like it was being performed.
Yeah,
that was what it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
So,
and only one person in our class put reverb on it, and it wasn't me.
Right. So when, obviously, you know, so you went out on tour and things like that, and then had you already decided that was going to be the career, or was it by going out on tour that made you kind of think that was it?
I obviously had that kind of I remember having that epiphany moment, standing in a room full of boxes of t-shirts, going, that was what I want to do. But it was when I was sitting in catering on tour, you know, like definitely no older than 16, and I just loved being in the environment. And I remember saying to myself, well, I don't have any technical skills, so I think I'll just aim to be a tour manager. You know, I'm an organized person. That's something to aim for. It hadn't really occurred to me initially that I would be able to gain the kind of technical acumen to do that as a job. It was only once I started getting stuck in, you know, really properly with because obviously at the beginning I was just pushing boxes in with the PA. It was only once I kind of got stuck in with uni as well that at the tech crew that I thought, you know, actually I was very musical. Obviously did music A level. I'm, you know, I might be able to do this. Even though I can't see any other women doing it anywhere. I might be able to do this. But I'm that kind of person. I'm like, you know, it doesn't matter to me that there was no other women doing it. I was like, something different. I want to do something different to everyone else. So here I am.
And amazing as well, you know, your parents were happy for you to go off on. Well, I assume they were happy. Well, they weren't happy.
No, they weren't really happy. I mean, obviously there was no mobile phones back then either. It was my mum would be ringing the production office, hassling the tour manager, which was mortifyingly embarrassing. But somehow she kind of started the wheels in motion, so she couldn't really stop me doing it. But at the same time, I think she was very worried about what I was getting up to.
Yeah. So in terms of, so you know, you obviously naturally kind of fell into sound, and I guess that's because of the love of music and things. Did you try anything else? Did you get into kind of lighting or anything, or was it just like, no, I just want to do sound?
No, I think the ladders put me off the lighting situation. I'm not good with heights and the idea that I have to climb up ladders. And it was always it was based in love of music for me. And the other thing that I was really, really into as a teenager was bootleg tapes, which again will mean nothing to a lot of people watching this, but people used to go to gigs before the advent of obviously camera phones, like with like sometimes quite big recording devices that they would smuggle into gigs and make terrible quality live recordings of concerts. And of course you couldn't see a concert on YouTube or anything like that, so to get your hands on these, some of them were quite hard to come by, but you'd always hear there's always different, like, subtle or not so subtle nuances in the sound that the band were playing live than their recordings. And that really excited me, that there's this song, you love this song, and then someone plays just a couple of notes different and it gives it a whole new feel. And that was something I really I loved without realizing what I was loving, if you see what I mean, which then now I look back feeds into why I became a live sound engineer.
And so what sort of venues were you touring in at that time with Levelers? What kind of
like town halls, kind of 1,000, 2,000 caps, kind of what you would now like a kind of big O2s, but at the time they were all what's called production touring, where you carry your own console, your own PA, the trucks of gear. Whereas nowadays, a lot of that level venue have got installs in them, so there's not as much opportunity to bring everything. But yeah, so that back at that time, it would be places like Rock City in Nottingham, or like Sheffield Town Hall, or those kind of like a lot of council run town halls and bigger like theatres kind of thing.
And so when you're mixing support bands on those kind of tours, I guess we're still talking analog days, so would you be given like a limited number of channels that you could kind of work with and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean that was my whole experience coming up. Even once I wasn't on tour with the Levelers, it was if you're on the support band, you're lucky, you're possibly given 8 channels at the end of the desk, not usually any outboard, whatever dregs of mics are left, and you've got to make it work with that. But obviously that's quite an entertaining challenge looking back on it. But these days that's not a thing, because digital, you can have as many channels as you like, theoretically, within reason. But it was I don't really know how I did it, but that was the norm. So you just got on with it. If you were really lucky, the headlining band would give you 1 compressor or a gate.
Just choose it wisely. Just use it.
What I ended up doing was building my own rack of stuff and hauling it around the world. This is before they clamped down on excess baggage, and I'd have a rack of my own compressors and gates and a couple of effects units, just so I could, wherever I went, I could have at least had some kind of chance.
So, I mean, this might kind of be where we jump around a little bit. So you've obviously seen the shift from analog into digital. And do you remember the first time you kind of saw or used the digital desk and what you thought?
I was really lucky to be in the right place at the right time with this, because the Levelers took out one of the very first digital consoles, which was a Soundcraft 328. It had no screens on it at all. It was just, it was probably about a quarter of the size of any analog desk that you would take. It was quite terrifying, to be honest, because you couldn't see anything that you were doing, essentially, if you think about it now. But I mixed the support act on a tour on that. In the first instance, which is obviously my first experience of it. But then I also got very lucky in that when Avid, which was DigiDesign at the time, brought out the Venue, which was their kind of first foray into a digital console, that I think only been on Paul McCartney's tour before it went out with the Manic Street Preachers. And I was mixing the support band on that a few years later, and obviously got their front house engineer was very, very good to us. He just let me share that console with him and taught me how to use it. Basically, he's later gone on actually to work for Avid now. So I got my hands on that, and that was a real kind of like first major like proper digital console for touring, basically.
So leaping forward a bit further, you actually you made the decision, whether it was your decision or Katie's decision, to take an analog console out.
It was my decision.
Your decision, yes.
Yeah.
We've got a bit of a video, actually. I think if we can just play out this video, because there's a couple of things around the Katie Melua stuff I'd just like to talk to you about, in particular about the analog stuff. But if we can play the video, Jake, and then we'll come back to those questions, if that's all right.
We're high on a wire with the world in our sights, and I'll never tire of the love that you give me every night. There are 9 million bicycles in Beijing, that's a fact. It's a thing we can't deny, like the fact that I will love you till I die. And there are 9 million bicycles in Beijing.
So there's loads of stuff to really talk about that. Let's stick with the analog side of things. So it was an XL4 that you decided to take out.
No, it was Heritage 3000 actually.
Oh, Heritage 3000 was okay.
Too big for the truck. Oh, that would have been my first choice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So basically, having for years and years been on these 8 channels on the end of an analog desk, and then finally getting to a level that I was taking my own console out. It was all digital by that point, and there was definitely it's usually in a 1-truck tour or the back of a trailer, so there was no chance I'd be able to take an analog desk with all the paraphernalia that goes with it, with the outboard and stuff. So I waited and waited and did all these tours with the various digital consoles, and then when this sort of came along, and it was with this incredible choir, I was like, this is the tour I'm gonna go back to analog on, and it was the best decision I ever made. It was like going home. It was like being at home mixing it.
I was going to ask you about that, yeah, in terms of how it felt going back to it. But yeah, like you say, if you kind of to have the whole board to yourself to do whatever you wanted to do with it,
and all the toys in Christendom. I remember the day I got to go to the PA company and choose whatever I wanted for the racks, and I had like banks and banks and banks of outboard to choose. It was like a kid in a candy shop, but it was just it was such an amazing experience, and it was so funny because it took me about 2 weeks to stop trying to save at the end of each day, because I was so ingrained in that saving, and even though I was obviously using an analog workflow, I still had this: have I saved it? Have I saved it? I didn't know where to save. It was quite funny.
So, I mean, in terms of in kind of saving and recalling for the next shows and things, I mean, what was your process behind doing
well,
that?
I mean, like with digital, you start off with what you had yesterday. There's nothing that's got moved that drastically really in overnight once it's been tipped and transported. So in a lot of respects, you're starting in the same place, and it's really the systems and the EQ of the room that is going to do the majority of changing. And then you're just tweaking to the room then. But I think for me what it was like there's no screens to distract you, so you've got to use your ears all the time, and you think you're using your ears when you're looking at this screen pulling the EQ around, but there's probably quite a large percentage of your ears you're not using because you're using your eyes, and as soon as you start using your eyes, your ears stop. And I know this because when I'm mixing shows, people fall off stages and drop guitars and I don't see it because my eyes aren't working because I'm listening so hard. But I think it was really it was real mixing because I was only able to use my ears, because I wasn't. You don't suddenly go into this automated system of, oh, it's a kick drum, I'll pull X frequency out and put X frequency in. You go, I can't exactly see which frequency I'm checking, so I'm just going to keep going until I hear that it's right, which I think was a brilliant place to go back to. Yeah, going back to the basics and just kind of actually mixing for the sound of it rather than which sounds so obvious, but actually when you're standing in front of 4 computer screens, there's an element of loss.
And what about the look on local crew face and stuff when you turn up with all the analog gear and there's stairs on the load-in? Is that always quite a fun
a lot of them? It's a kind of badge of honor, of course we know what it is, get it in, no problem. But I'm sorry, very stereotypical there. I only had a couple of problems, and it was mainly when there was much younger crew who were like, well, we can't lift this. And I'm like, well, everyone else has lifted it. I've got a brilliant photo of it being flown on a crane to front of house in one theatre in Norway, literally being strapped in and like dangling over. And I've got another brilliant photo of the local crew in Liverpool where they couldn't fit the console down the aisle in the theatre with people down the side of it. So it's 3 guys with their feet sitting down on the floor on the end of it, pushing it down the aisle for the mix position. It was generally all right. I mean, it was a long tour. It was like 8 or 9 weeks, and we didn't have very many problems because we did obviously advanced the fact that we were bringing it. And I think a lot of these old theatres did originally have big analog consoles in there, or certainly they had tours going through. So to all intents and purposes, it's not, things have not changed so much that you can't get an analog desk at front of a house, even though it's not really very common anymore. Yeah,
sure. And I read somewhere as well that William Orbit came to see the show because he produced Katie Mello's album and stuff, and liked the sound of the show.
Yeah, he was amazing. He came to sound check, and he didn't say it to me. He said it to Katie. He said, this is one of the top 10 sonic experiences of my entire life. So
wow.
Get better endorsement than that.
Get that on a t-shirt. That's right. Yeah. We had William Orbit in yesterday. Actually, he did one of our guest talks yesterday. So it's kind of fortuitous that that's all kind of fallen into place. So yeah, so it's great. So in terms of still on the sort of Katie Melua thing, looking at things like mic choices, and obviously, you know, you mentioned about the choir. Was it 24-piece choir?
It was she's done some. We've done a couple of shows with 24. It's
yeah.
The tour with 16, because 16 is the maximum number you can fit on a tour bus. So
right, okay.
It was 16. It was brilliant actually. Katie got really involved with the mic choices for that, because when they toured before, I was her front of house engineer. They'd used DPA mics, but they'd used 1/3, and I wasn't really happy with 1/3 for the coverage. So I spoke to DPA, and DPA sent me. You know, forgive me, I'm not very good at numbers. I can't remember the exact models of mic they sent me, but they sent me about 3 or 4 different types of mic to try, all with varying degrees of pickup pattern. And we basically, in the production rehearsals, we stood there with the choir and we experimented for probably a whole afternoon to work out what the best placement, which mics were the best ones to use. And we came to, you know, we definitely had a mutual consensus over which were the best ones. So we ended up using a different set of mics that they'd had previously, 1/2 instead of 1/3 as well. And you know, that was a really interesting experience, because you don't get a lot of time to experiment when you're doing live sound. Often it's a get it in, get it up and get it on, and you haven't got, you know, you just have to get on with it. And that's a large part of the job is damage limitation and managing the fact that you've got no time and you've just got to make it work with what you've got to hand at the time. Certainly on your way up, that is the job. So to have that luxury of listening to different microphones in the same space, you know, moving them around, changing the number per person, etc., was a really brilliant experience for me to do that. And it really paid off taking that time, because that choir sounded incredible. And every day at the gig, it was the gig's very, very quiet gig, and it was how loud can we get the choir, you know, and we topped 108 dB. That was the loudest we got them.
Wow, okay. And so we should just mention, obviously, because you're at Shaw today, so other microphones are available. But so I mean, that sort of leads on, I suppose, to talk about mic choice and mic placement in general. How important is mic placement to you first and foremost? I suppose thinking about mixing support bands on only 8 channels and all of that kind of stuff, it's probably one of the most important things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I always say, you know, if you've got a good sounding instrument at source and a decent mic in the right place, you shouldn't have to do very much beyond that. But obviously the placement is the crucial thing. Even if it's not quite the right mic, the placement can make all the difference. I think it's vocal mics you have no control over, because if you've got a vocalist who's all over the place, you've just got to work with it. But on the drums, I would say that's where that really comes into its own. I work a lot nowadays with, you know, the guitars are all on Kemper systems, so there's very few actual amplifiers to mic up, and a lot of electronics and keyboards and stuff. So I don't, you know, the drums is where I seem to end up doing all my mic work at the moment, particularly with the apps I'm working for at the moment. So yeah, and I think again, it's that, you know, there's usually time to maneuver mics a little bit in a sound check, if you know, as long as you're not cut for time. So, and then you start to learn pretty quickly, you know, what it sounds like when it's in the wrong place and where it needs to go to be put in the right place. So but I'd say getting your drum sound right is almost crucial. You know, you can have everything else sounding amazing, but if you don't get your drum sound right, the gig's not going to sound good.
Yeah. And if you could only do a show with one model of microphone, would you have a choice?
One model of microphone. Well, it depends what kind of band it is, how loud the band is. I mean, I would say, you know, obviously the Shure SM58 is a major go-to for a lot of things. The 57 is also pretty amazing, but the AKG 414 is a condenser mic that's very, very useful, because it's got varying pickup patterns and filters on it. So that's a good coverall as well. Like the fact that one of the best sounding live things I ever saw was a band in a horrible nightclub in Brighton, country act called Chatham County Line, and they all stand around 414, and even though all of the circumstances were horrendous for them, it was an absolutely amazing gig, because the way they pulled in and out and they used this microphone to the actual best of its ability, and they knew how to mix themselves in and out of that mic by the positions that they were standing in.
Yeah. So obviously your band knowing how to use their mics as well
Of course, I mean,
help.
yeah,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
absolutely.
So okay, so let's have a talk about. I mean, you've had experience with tour managing and that kind of stuff as well. And in terms of all aspects of advancing a show, whether it's as a tour manager or as a the live sound engineer and things, can you perhaps talk a little bit about that? Let's say if you had a tour planned around the UK, for example, what would your kind of organisation process be in terms of advancing shows? And
Sure. Well, I mean, I tour manage when it's kind of like financially sensible and budgets are tight, or if it's just I do quite a lot of legacy acts from America, so Natalie Merchant and Lloyd Cole. It doesn't make sense for them to have a separate tour manager because it's only them and a guitar player. So I do the sound and I tour manage that, and I do the same for Ward Thomas because they're a very easy band. They don't require a lot of babysitting as such. So that's the circumstances in which I would do that. But I really, really enjoy the advancing part of a tour because it's like being given kind of a jigsaw and putting it all together. So you're given the dates and then it's like, well, off you go. So you need to budget that. You need to work out how you're going to get around. You need to work out, what kind of equipment you need to take with you that's not going to be, suffice at the venues. So, you usually start off kind of from a position of, okay, well, what's the band going to be set up going to be? How many people are in the band? How many crew do we need to facilitate that happening? How much money is there available to do that? So it's because I've been doing it for so long, I'm a bit on autopilot. I can look at something and tell you how much it's going to cost just from the dates. But I think from a kind of, startup position, you'd work out how many miles it is all the way around the country. You'd work out what's the longest drive in between shows without a day off. That's to work out how you get around. How many people is it more sensible to take a tour bus where you can all sleep on that? Or is it more sensible to go in a van? Will everyone fit in a van? Will the venues you play if you're in a tour bus have showers, or do you have to get hotels as well because there's no venue? There's twists and turns at every point. But from a technical point of view, it's very, very difficult until you get to a level where it's black and white that it's a production tour, which doesn't happen as soon as you'd have thought these days. In fact, even on that Katie Melua production tour with the choir, a lot of the European gigs often had their own systems in-house, but it worked out cheaper for us to have them take out the system, which cost more money than it did to keep that system and locally hire for the shows that didn't have their system. So it's very, very higgledy-piggledy as to what venues have what, and that can prove really challenging with audio and lighting as well, particularly with lighting, because the standard of in-house, I think we're at a point now with the live audio is that most places have got halfway decent systems, and if you take a console you can make that work. But with lighting, the variation on the kind of quality of stuff in the venues is dramatic. So trying to kind of navigate your way through how much gear you can bring, whether you need a truck or whether you can afford a truck or whether it's all going to go in the trailer with the backline is another kind of major kind of factor in how you advance what's going to happen at these shows. And I think it's very hard for managers to understand that if you say to them, well, we're going to spend X amount of £1,000 bringing this because these number of venues haven't got it, because they'll go, well, these venues have got it. And it starts to get a very boring conversation about logistics and bringing it in at this venue and why this venue can't do this and that. So it's because it's a case by case basis that then you've got to build a bigger picture of. It's quite an involved process, but it's very interesting and it makes your brain work, that's for sure.
Mm. It sounds in terms of that level of organisation, but also I guess the more tours you've done, then perhaps the easier that becomes, or certainly the more.
Definitely an experience element of it that massively helps you, because you've got to understand as well how people behave when they're on tour and whether or not I always say to people, it's not about getting the best. It's not about getting the kind of doing it the cheapest way possible. It's about getting the best value for things and getting the best value. Part of getting the best value for a tour is making sure everyone comes off it alive. Not having been either tired or not being able to eat properly or that kind of thing, all of which are major pitfalls in touring for a living. Yeah.
And in terms then of pre-production side of it, I guess going back to the more sort of front of house type role, I guess it's not every single tour that you would get to do a big amount of pre-production for, but I was reading about the Fox's support slot for Coldplay and the amount of pre-production that kind of went into that. I think it's quite interesting for our students to kind of see, because when they're kind of learning, they often have a band who'll arrive and they'll do a sound check, they'll do the gig, and then that's done. But if you could perhaps just talk about maybe with that instance of the level of pre-production that you had to do, and
we didn't have a great deal of notice on that tour. I remember I was on a flight back from Japan with Foxes, And we landed, and the manager said, he just said, I had a message saying, Coldplay 3 weeks. Can you phone me? So we had 3 weeks to sort it out, which is not a great deal of time when you're going back out to America on a 6-week tour. But I think from the technical point of view, obviously Coldplay are providing everything we need to do it. But we also virtually guaranteed not to get any kind of sound check, because I've done stadium tours, and the support act, we were first on of 2 support acts as well. You're going to get a line check when the doors are already open. So we had to walk into that situation like festival style, ready to go, basically. They were giving us Digico SD7 consoles at front of house and monitors, which are, top of the range, top notch consoles, and huge digital consoles. I've been almost exclusively using Soundcraft up to that point, and so I had to quickly get myself into a PA company with a Digico SD7 and get some FaceTime with it to learn how to use the thing. But also our monitor engineer couldn't do the tour because he had a family wedding or something like that to go to, and so it was decided that we would just use the monitor systems technician, rather than try and train somebody or get someone familiar with the gig with such short notice, especially given the budget was incredibly tight. So we only really had one rehearsal day to get these consoles up and running, or this console up and running, because we didn't have any budget, it made more sense if I built the monitor file at the same time as the front of house file, which obviously I was used to doing at a much lower level. I'd been with Foxes right from the start, and it'd actually taken us quite a long time to get a monitor engineer, because they'd just been happy with how it had worked from front of house. And again, always budget constraints if you don't need it. I agreed that we would get a lighting engineer rather than a monitor engineer, because I thought it was more important for the show, and monitors from front of house wasn't proving to be too problematic for me at that point. So anyway, I went and had a day on the console without the band there. It took me 90 minutes to work out how to name the channels on the desk, which I feel very stupid about. But I was so determined I was going to do it myself, which is really stupid. But, I wanted to be left alone with it, because that's how you get to know something, because it's very easy to ask somebody and then you don't develop a deep understanding of it. So, yeah, once I got that, I was flying. But, it was a kind of intimidating. It's an intimidating console when you don't know the kind of system and you've been using. This is the other problem with digital consoles is, when you had an analog console, you could walk up to any manufacturer's analog console and the game was in the same place and the EQ worked the same way. Whereas now with digital, every different manufacturer has a completely different operating system. So you're starting from scratch every time you walk up to a new one. So anyway, I didn't know the Digico system at that point, and so anyway, it was such a sophisticated console. It had two brains, so to speak, running a kind of constant backup of the thing you were doing. So anyway, I had a good day on it eventually in the PA company. So I took it into rehearsals, no problem, and everything was going really well, really fine. And then something went wrong with the brains talking to each other. I'm not even sure to this day what actually happened, but it suddenly started throwing up channels completely different places to where I thought they were, and the monitors were going out the window because the channels are coming up in different places. So it basically sat down on me, and because it was like late on a Sunday, of course I couldn't get hold of anyone, and it was they were in the middle of a rehearsal for what was going to be the biggest show of their lives. So I just had to quickly load my DigiDesign Avid file and take what I had done already with the SD7 and hope for the best when we got to the show. So the first show was the 99,000 capacity MetLife Stadium in New York, and I loaded up. So I loaded up the file. I gave the file to the systems guy who was going to do monitors, and I loaded up the same file into front of house and just hoped for the best, basically. But it was amazing. It was one of the best gigs of my whole life. Yeah,
just the mixture of adrenaline and everything, I guess, just it all coming together and then making it work. We've got a photo here actually, which I've labelled as production rehearsal. I'm assuming this is what it is, but I think this isn't with Foxes or anything. But I think it shows you. It looks like you're more in a studio. You're behind glass and stuff. Is that a general way you would do a production rehearsal, or was that just?
That's Katie Melly, but that's not that. It's the production rehearsal. There's several levels of it. So with Katie, we do a band rehearsal, which I'll just take a little tiny desk into. They'll all be on wedges. It'll just be me and them, and we'll just run songs, no in-ear monitors, just literally about the band learning the songs. Then we do what's called like a festival production, which is what this photo is from, where I have a console. Monitor engineer has the console he's going to have. We have the consoles we're going to have at festivals, and we run it up with in-ears, and we do it kind of like literally like there's no PA obviously, because it's just little monitoring speakers for me. So that's like the kind of that's like a band kind of festival productions. And then of course the big production rehearsals when you go into a kind of aircraft hangar and you have all the lighting and all the PA, everything you're going to use, which is the full production rehearsals.
So coming out the back of that, when you're planning your tours and things, do you get involved in the system design or anything, or do you tend to rely on the? I mean, you mentioned that obviously a lot of venues will have the system in already, but when you are putting system in, do you get involved?
So mainly on Katie, we take a system. I am very much guided by the PA companies. I have a choice in the system. Like I have my favourites. Like I'm an absolute acoustics junkie, because that's what the levelers had when I first started building PA. That's the PA I've system teched myself. Not that I've done a lot of it, but that's what I have done. But on that last Katie tour, I was advised by the PA company that the D&B made a smaller, more suitable box for the varying different kinds of venue we were going into. So something that was more modular, that would fit better in the kind of because we weren't going into necessarily the same size of space all the time. And I took that out and had a really great time on it. So in terms of the systems design, I mean, the coverage aspect is all done by computers these days, but you make decisions about how many subs you take in, and about in terms of coverage, in terms of extra in and out fills and things like that. And I work very much with the systems tech. I choose the person I want to be my systems tech, basically, and I work with them to make it work in the venues that we go to, basically. Like on Katie Mellia, there's very little sub. We might put 1 or 2 subs aside. Sometimes we just turn them off. A lot of festivals, I just turn them off because it's not that kind of music. And then other times I mix boxes and you want all the sub you can get,
I think we've got a picture of Roundhouse loading. I think it's Roundhouse, but there's you stood there. I think it's L Acoustic System flown in there, actually. I think Jake's going to bring it up now. I've caught him by surprise. Oh, there we go.
That's an interesting gig to mix, actually. I first mixed in there and they had a very old PA called a Butterfly System, which was a tricky one, but it's obviously an interesting size and shape of space. You have to do a lot of work with the system EQ to get it sounding good. It certainly doesn't sound good in sound check.
Because it's the old railway where they used to turn the trains around.
Yeah, exactly that, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah.
Beautiful looking venue though. I mean, when it's rammed full, it sounds amazing.
Yeah, and they light up the roof and everything, don't they, and kind of do all that stuff in there. Yeah, it's an amazing place. Cool. Okay, I've got a slight change of subject here. Actually, I want to have a little talk about effects used in live stuff, but I've got a video from the Ward Thomas show at Union Chapel, so I'm going to ask Jake if we can play that out, and then we'll have a chat about effects and things like that, if that's cool.
One generation's length away, providing life out on my own. Stop this train, I wanna get off and go home again. I can't take the speed it's moving in. I know I can't, but honestly, won't someone stop this train? So scared of getting older, I'm only good at being young. So I play the numbers.
So I don't know how many people watch you've been to Union Chapel, but in terms of natural reverb, because it is just a church and sort of living and breathing church. How much of that is a challenge, having that kind of reverb to deal with, and how much of it is actually just like really useful for a band like Ward Thomas?
Well, I think it's very easy with effects to just dial in what you know and hope for the best. But when you go into a space like that, you've got to work with the room you're in, basically. and that means really spending time listening to the reverb that you've got in the board, and trying to make it sound like they're singing in the space they're in. And I think that goes for any venue, really. You know, you go into so many places and you see a singer standing in a pub and they've got the cathedral reverb on, and it just jars you out. It pulls you straight out of the moment, really. So it's a laborious job, but you just, again, it's back to using your ears. You've got to go through every tool in your, you know, in your arsenal of reverbs, and all these desks these days come with so many on board, and then try and make the reverb sit in the space that you're in. And in a church, less is obviously more all the time, but you might also find that the reverb is not very nice in the room, and therefore you do want to pick up the reverb off the console. But it's about making the two things work together. And the thing that I always would say to do is that you don't put your vocals through one reverb and give everything else a completely different reverb, or you give the drums a certain reverb and the vocals. Obviously, you know, you want a snare reverb as well, but then you want to put the snare through a little bit of the vocal reverb, or vice versa, and fiddle around with it, because otherwise, why would you want the snare to sound like it's coming in a different place to the vocals? You're trying to make it look like you're trying to give people the experience of seeing that band in that space. You're there to enhance that. To facilitate what the band would sound like if they were just standing on stage with no PA. And I think it's really, really important to experiment in that if you have time to do that.
Mm. And so if you could only have one reverb or one effect that you can take with you on tour, what would it be?
Well, just a nice Lexicon reverb, basically.
Yeah, it's your go-to tool. Do you still take one out with you, even if you're touring with a digital console? Do you still take outboard?
Sometimes, depends what kind of how big the tour is. I've still got a couple of effects units in my rack that I would take if I've got room. I more take dynamic EQ. I've got a couple of different versions. I've got a BSS 901 and an XDA D2. They are just like so useful on vocals, and they aren't the only desk they've ever. Well, they are built into some of the more sophisticated mixing on this, but they're much easier to use on when you can jump on the buttons, basically.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, I think we're going to go over to some student questions. I'm going to hand over to Darren over here at the moment, but my series just kicked off. That was nice. Will Brownsword and Nathan Kinson seem to have asked the same question, whether they work together on it, Darren, but can you jump in on that question there, please?
Indeed. Let's have a look. So what is your go-to mixing console, and why does it appeal to you so much?
It'll be an analog console. So I love the XL4 is lovely, but it's enormous and I can't reach the gain. So Midas Heritage 3000 would be my go-to if money and space were no object, because like I said earlier, it's like real mixing.
Are they hard to come by at the moment? Are there lots of like rental companies who don't tend to have them, or can you still?
Most rental companies have kept a couple of those, because I think there's a few bands like the Chemical Brothers still exclusively use XL4s at both ends. PJ Harvey definitely uses an XL4. There's a few acts that still are committed analog users.
Mm. I had a sort of question off the top of that, actually. Well, actually, I think we already answered it, but you're saying about L-acoustic would be your choice of system if you were going to put a system.
I mean, it very much depends on the kind of space we're in. I haven't yet had a play with the new immersive systems. So obviously L-acoustics and D&B have both brought out immersive PA systems, which I've been talking to L-acoustics about using something like that on Katie's next tour, hopefully.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, as well, inside of the Elisa or something like that. Have you, obviously you say you've not had a huge chance to play with it yet, but do you think that's going to be the future of most tours, or do you think it's likely that it'll be just very select kind of?
I think because of the infrastructure required to hang it, it's not going to be able to go into a lot of the old theatres, because they just won't have the weight in the roof or the points in the roof to do it, basically. But I see it coming in, as soon as you get into arenas and stadiums where that's not so much of an issue, I'd say it'll come up. And
have you seen much of the Clang system for in-ears coming out about? That's the sort
I know of it and I know how it works, but I'm fiercely not a monitor engineer.
Just let someone else deal with all that stuff. Yeah.
I did more as a monitor engineer when I was 22, and it was a nightmare.
Well, on that actually, it's International Women's Day today and things. I read some of you said that you you felt there tended to be more female monitor engineers than there were front of house. Do you have any
Yeah,
idea?
absolutely. There's loads of absolutely amazing female monitor engineers coming through. I think it's a much harder job. It's a much harder job, and I think I wouldn't want to offend any of my colleagues who are female monitor engineers. I think it's about having a more personal relationship with the band. It's about being tucked away as well, not being seen. I don't think that's the women wanting not to be seen. I think it's easier to get that as a role than it is to be standing out front. Because I mean, it's probably not as commonplace now, but I certainly, on my way up, I'm aware of a couple of major artists and or their management going, they just won't have a girl do front of house. Now, I don't know if that's still a thing, but I don't want to generalize in any way, but I absolutely think monitors is a much more difficult job, 100%. But I also think you're less in the fire, you're completely in the firing line of the band, but you're less in the kind of public firing line, so to speak. And I think a lot of women, because we're such a minority in this industry, it's about having the confidence to say, no, I can do that. I can do that. Well, if anyone can do that, I can do that, But I think it's more difficult to get good roles. It's sad to say that it is, there's, hopefully we're coming out of it, but there's an old boys network, really at play in these really good front of house gigs, certainly. So I think it's much, much harder to get good front of house work, because when you're, whereas because you develop a more personal relationship, because the band are hearing your work day in, day out, you get recognised much more quickly as a very good monitor engineer.
Yeah, sure. And you've had potentially the ultimate challenge recently, because you and your partner had a baby. So congratulations on that. But you decided to take your baby on tour. So how did that work? How did it go down? Was it kind of, I guess you had a great support network in terms of the act and things, or?
Yeah, I mean, I left it very, very late to have a baby. I've considered it to be career suicide. I considered that I would, there was no chance I'd be able to pull in the number of gigs I need to make a living if I had a baby in tow, if at all any gigs. I waited until I was in a position where I knew that at least 2 of the acts I work with would be fully supportive of helping me to make it work in whatever capacity. And I knew that my mum would be up for coming on tour with me. So it was, it was obviously a kind of, let's see, I mean, Ward Thomas took a huge leap of faith in agreeing to let me bring him. So, well, first of all, obviously the whole world shutting down when I was 8 weeks pregnant was, and I'm not dismissing the kind of, the hardship it has caused and the death and destruction. But for me and my partner, that was the best thing ever, because I was 8 weeks pregnant and we both had never taken any time off work. Because when you do this for a living, you just say yes all the time to everything, and it comes before anything else in your life. Work is like the most important thing, because you can't maintain your career any other way unless you just keep saying yes and bend over backwards to make sure that you're there and available. So to be given all that time off was the most incredible, opportunity to regroup, not only about having a baby, but regroup about our health and our welfare and our lives together. This is my partner. We've been together for 6 years, and we'd spent barely more than 2 weeks in succession together because we were on tour all the time. But so obviously when I had the baby, it was October 2020, so we were still very much in the thick of it. And the first 6 months, again, my partner and I were both obviously completely off. And then we ran out of money. So my partner went to Japan to run one of the Olympic sites. He's a production manager. So he went to Japan for 5 months. Obviously, that was a very hard decision to make, given that we had a very 6-month-old baby, but he had to do it. So anyway, when it came to work obviously started to dribble in summer 2021. So there's a couple of festivals. Festivals weren't really a problem so much, because obviously you're not kind of traveling. You're only there a couple of days. It's here and there. But when it came to this tour of Ward Thomas's, it was going to be initially 4 weeks, and then they tagged on Tom Jones support on the end of it. And I didn't. Well, I knew that my baby would sleep through the night, because he sleeps in bed with me and he's breastfed and he doesn't cry at night. He's never cried at night. So I knew it was fairly safe to bring him on the bus without disturbing everybody. I had obviously contingency plans if it was going to be a problem, but it was completely down to Ward Thomas being up for it. And as far as they were concerned, they said that we don't want to do the tour with anyone else, and you come with the baby. So the baby comes on tour. So I think we smashed a fairly major glass ceiling doing that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And also, like you mentioned, that your mum came on tour as well. So that's like a nice kind of full circle of she's worried
Yeah,
about
no,
paying
for
for
sure.
it.
I mean, managing her is a whole nother
Yeah.
management ball game. But no, I mean, obviously, it was very, very intense, and just trying to keep him fed properly was actually quite tricky as well, because obviously you don't eat well when you're on tour, especially on a tour like that when there's no catering. Once we got on the Tom Jones support, there was catering; it was a lot easier. But it was a lot more to think about. But I genuinely think everybody who was on the tour had a positive experience out of it, and people, obviously we did an article for TPI magazine recently, and there's been a hugely positive response to that. And I'm emphatic in in the idea that it's not going to work on all tours. There's a lot of bands that just will not want that around their tour, but there's also no reason for a lot of tours to not have a baby on tour with them if that's what enables the mother to continue working. I don't think it's a huge compromise on anyone's kind of like comfort and safety having a baby on tour. I've obviously met some quite deep resistance to it as well, but I think I would like to keep working a bit. I know I'm not the days of me doing 250, 300 gigs a year are gone. But I knew that going into this, but it's just very sad that, when you're 18, 19, 20, deciding to do this for a living, then having babies is the last thing on your mind. But obviously it starts to creep up on you the older you get. And it is very, very difficult, because I don't think there's a solution to it other than, massively compromising the amount that you can work, or just going into a different field. In fact, that's why I'm here to talk at Shaw about, basically about what can we offer women who have careers in live audio as an alternative to needing to go on tour.
That's brilliant, thank you. We've got another question from a student, actually. It was related to the pandemic thing, really, but so Tyler Gibson's question, Darren.
Okie dokie. So, how did the pandemic impact your workflow, and how have you adapted since? Finding new ways to plan projects, collaborate and create through newer technologies that came to light during the pandemic?
So it's very hard for me to kind of differentiate between how having a baby in the pandemic has affected my career, between having the pandemic has affected my career. Because certainly, I was completely baby focused for almost all of it. And I'm pretty sure I'd have gone mental if I hadn't had something to focus on, given the fact I haven't done anything but work since I was 15. It's had actually, honestly, very little real effect on. We basically kind of picked up where we left off with touring. I don't think it's really it's had much of an effect on how I go about planning things, because the music industry was the last thing to reopen. It was almost kind of past the point of there being lots of protocol in place anymore once we got going again, because you can't really have social distancing protocol in live venues. I mean, obviously they did try, but it wasn't economically viable to run proper tours that make money. So I didn't get working again until all that kind of stuff was lifted.
Thank you. There was a potential doom and gloom question from Theo. Theo Doody asks, what's the most disastrous gig you've worked on? What went wrong and how do you deal with those situations?
I was doing a Ward Thomas gig in Edinburgh Queen's Hall. We've been on tour for 2 weeks, absolutely no problems, everything was going well. We had our own consoles using house PAs, and I was mixing the support band, and in the very last note of the support band there was a big crack, and it was so in time with the last note that I wasn't even sure I really heard it. Anyway, didn't think anything of it, loaded my file for the Ward Thomas. They came on, first song, loads of distortion coming up all the channels, no idea why. Then it went away, everything was normal for about 2 or 3 bars, and then it all came back, and then it all completely disappeared. So, that's as bad, as disastrous as it gets. We ascertained fairly quickly that it might be the multi-core, because that was about all it could be that was universally affecting everything. So we did have a main and a backup, but it seemed to have not switched to that. So we made sure it was running on the next backup, ran the gig up again, half a song, not having it at all. My lighting guy had a reel of Cat 5 in the bus, a spare reel for his lighting console. He ran to the bus, ran the reel Cat 5 to give us a third line. Still didn't make any difference. So we had to then get the monitor engineer to mix the front of house mix from the stage, with me gesticulating at him wildly what to turn up and down, with all of the management and the MD at the gig to watch. And it turned out that what had gone wrong was the card, the card in the stage box had failed. So the card's got both the main and the backup line on it, and that had failed. So we would never have found that during a show, and they had to replace the whole stage box in the end.
So this is while you've got an audience in, obviously the show's...
Yeah, 2,000 people, something like that. In.
Yeah. Does anyone make an announcement, or do the audience just kind of realise?
Well, we couldn't make an announcement because obviously the console was not working. But I think there was kind of we turned it over to the monitor guy fairly quickly and got noise running, and then they made an announcement that there'd been a problem.
Yeah.
Kind of thing you have anxiety dreams about forever.
So there's a question from Finn Campbell, Darren, on that one. From
Finn Campbell. What was your favourite tour, and what do you think makes a successful tour from your point of view?
My favourite tour. I've done so many. I've been so lucky. I've been so many absolutely amazing tours. The ones that always spring to mind, it's more about the people than anything else. So you obviously make incredible connections with people. You meet incredible people. From a spectacular point of view, it has to be the Coldplay Stadium support in America. I wouldn't proclaim to be Coldplay's biggest fan, but it was a hell of a show. I mean, there's something like 100 grand worth of pyro spunked in like the third song or something like that. So it was amazing to be around a stadium gig from start to finish every day. So that playing to and seeing 100,000 people, their special light things, and all that kind of stuff. So that from a kind of technical spectacular that was. But the tours that I think of, I did a very, very small tour with a legendary American folk singer, Natalie Merchant, and her guitar player came over from America, and it was just me with the two of them in a van. We just turned it into a sightseeing tour. It was like I think it was like ridiculously hot summer we had in 2018. There was no air conditioning anywhere, because obviously British hotels don't really have air conditioning, so it was kind of sweaty. But we went to all these brilliant, like classically British tourist sites: Robin Hood's Bay, the Bronte House, Stonehenge, and I made such a wonderful connection with both Natalie and her guitar player. In fact, Natalie was probably the person that convinced me it was the right thing to do to try and get pregnant.
Amazing. I've got a quote from you actually, just talking about the stadium thing. You said, "I was born to mix in stadiums." What was it about mixing in stadiums that?
Oh, it just sounded so good straight off the bat of that crazy rehearsal. It just reminded me of those old days when you go to a big festival with a really well set up PA. Because when I first started doing big festivals, I was coming out of tiny little toilet venues with terrible PA systems and broken old analog mixing consoles, and suddenly you'd walk into a festival, and even if you were like first on the bill, you were still mixing on state-of-the-art gear and a state-of-the-art PA, and obviously apart from the wind, no acoustics to challenge you outdoors. So you used to be in this situation where you'd have 30 minutes to dial your gig into this analog console. You were never quite sure how it was going to sound, and the band would walk out, and then there you were, it was off. And that feeling of not knowing but then nailing it after, like, the singer walks on and it's there, the vocal's there. That was the feeling I got in the stadium mixing with Coldplay. So yeah, I'll take it off your hands anytime.
I guess being in the centre of something like that as well is, you are almost dead centre to that, and to look around and see everybody there must be.
Festivals are definitely some of my most favourite mixing experiences.
Yeah. We've got a question from, actually slightly on that already, but from Lewis Evans, Darren. Then,
how do you adapt to different rooms and the room's acoustics?
Well, I wouldn't be. I mean, obviously, systems designers would have a nice smart rig and lots of different systems analysis tools. I obviously, I glance at those and I use them to an extent. But I think the experience of going in and out of different rooms every day of your working life means that you just start to trust how a room is going to respond, because most of them, you can have the worst sounding soundtrack and most rooms get better with a few bodies in. So you start to get a kind of sense of how the room is going to behave and how little or much you need to do to start addressing the difficulties in that room. And part of the thing you can't teach people in live sound is kind of kind of hearing, essentially. You know, so it's about learning to trust your instincts and your experience in terms of how you go about setting up that room. And volume, I think, you know, the other key thing is it's very, very easy to make something sound good when it's really loud. The real skill is making something powerful but not crazy loud.
I was going to ask about sound limits and things. Obviously, quite a lot of venues will impose a limit on your overall volume things. Have you had any challenges with that?
Yeah, much more so at festivals, actually. And I think, you know, that it's difficult inside venues, because when you've got a very loud drum kit, you've got to get the gig over that drum kit. So if you've got a particularly loud drummer, you haven't got to hope. You know, the gig can be the noise limit coming off the stage before you've even, turn the PA on. But I think at festivals, again, you're dealing with you're dealing with state-of-the-art equipment and all the circumstances you need outdoors, but there can be really punitive sound limits, which can ruin it for you. You know, I've certainly been to gigs at places like Hyde Park. Paul Simon springs to mind, where it was so quiet, it wasn't enjoyable, you know, but you obviously have to work within those limits. The thing that is more important in that situation is managing the people who are imposing those limits, because if you've got someone who doesn't really understand about mixing sound, they come down on you, you know, or certainly about the pressures of a changeover where you are essentially not getting a sound check and you're putting the band on with 30 minutes to kind of, you know, to listen to it through your headphones. It's about trying to convince them to give you the benefit of the doubt and let you get a handle on the sound before they start coming down hard on you. And I think people can lose their temper quite a lot in that circumstance, and that's just not going to work out for you, basically.
Great, thank you. Have we had any questions come in live, Darren?
We have just a few.
Okay.
There's one from James Harris. What is your process for building a mix, and how do you know when your mix is good?
How do I know when a mix is good? I don't think you ever, when you're the engineer, you're not ever completely happy with anything. There's always something that can be improved. My process, though, would be, so first of all, when I walk into a venue, I obviously mic everything up and I listen to the PA with a track I know a little bit, just more to hear the subs than anything else. And then I use my voice to listen to the room, because that's the most reliable source in that room. I know what my voice sounds like everywhere. Now you can put a track on, obviously, which you know really well, but I find, for me, my voice is a better indicator of what I'm dealing with. And then in terms of building a mix, it's very much, people go to gigs and they the vast majority of people want to just hear the vocals. They're not even going to think about anything else. But you know, you've got to take a stance yourself when you're mixing it on what you want to, you know, what needs to be heard and what needs to stick out. And as you mix it, and there's always obviously an argument as whether you want to sound like the record or whether you want a whole new experience. So I start with the vocals. You know, the vocals is the first thing I put through the PA once I've listened to my own voice through it. And I get the vocal in that place, and then everything else kind of cascades from there. As I said before, the drums is often one of the only other acoustic things in the room that you're miking up. So you're getting that right. I spend a lot of time getting the drums right. So once I've got the vocal loud in the room, I turn the vocal off, and then I start with the drum kit. So I tend to not, obviously you've line checked, but I tend to not start with kick, because someone's sitting there going kick is not kicking the kick drum in the way they are when they're doing kick, snare, hat, or playing the whole kit. So I would jump straight into kick, snare, hat then, and spend time making kick, snare, hat sound good. Same with the toms. You've line checked them when you know they'll work. The last thing you want is someone going badoing, because they're never actually playing the drum in that way. They're playing it as part of the kit. So again, about playing the whole kit. So I'd spend a lot more time hearing the kit being played as opposed to being individually struck to make the drums sound right. And then it's a case of just, it's very hard to explain I don't know anyone, how you explain how you set gain, because gain to me is not a kind of, you do it like this. It's very much an innate, I can hear that the gain is right on this. And obviously then you can adjust it later, but I don't know how to explain how I set gain, but I just have an innate feeling of where it should be, again, from years and years of mixing bands in rooms.
Great, thank you. So some more live questions.
We've got another one from James Harris, actually. I mix at a large venue with an S7000 under a balcony. It sounds so different behind the desk and out in the crowd. How do you deal with a bad mix position when you can't change it?
You just have to keep stepping out until you've got a feel for the difference, basically. Now, that's not always possible, particularly with Katie Melly. It's all seated audience. I can't keep running in and out. So I need to make sure in the sound check that I've got a handle on what the difference is. And then as other than that, there's very little you can do other than trust your instincts on it, and trust that you're, it's also very difficult to mix it in a way that feels very uncomfortable where you're standing, but sometimes you just have to get on with it and do it like that. Like if it's very, very stubby under that balcony, you're going to have to you're going to have to be uncomfortable while you're mixing it to give anyone half chance of getting a decent mix out front. It's not easy though. There's no simple way around it, basically.
Right. Have we got any more questions? We've got quite a few. Another one is, are there any tricks of the trade which you would find invaluable, or any go-tos when the time is tight or you need a quick fix when problem solving?
Less is more. Just literally gain and faders, and everything else you can sort out later. And high pass filters. High pass filters are your best friend. It doesn't matter if the band come on and it sounds a bit thin. If they're all on, you can hear everything. You can knock the phases back. But it's better to come on and it sound a bit thin than to be howling feedback all around the room. That's my quick fix, basically. Everything else can come later. Get your gain, get your high pass filters set, and get your vocal up there. Even if you're doing a festival, time is tight. If you can hear the vocals, and that's all people are going to go to in the first instance. You'll have more time than you think to get everything else up and running. Get the vocals out there and get a high pass filter on them higher than you think. All filter the vocals higher than you think.
Yeah, I like that. I've got another question from one of our degree students, William Elson. Is there any new audio technology that you're excited about? Anything that could be considered game-changing, like going from analogue to digital desks?
Like we were talking about before, the immersive PA systems, I think I'm very, very excited to work with that. Certainly with something like Katie's choir, it would be very, very interesting to hear that through that kind of system. I noticed that analog desks, that digital desks are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The latest Digico 328, something, or 348, something, 338 is enormous. And so I feel like maybe we are starting to return to a place where there's a little bit more hands-on control rather than it all being on layers and layers and screens. And if that's the case, I'm excited about having more knobs to get my hands on.
I've got a few more, if that's okay. Good old obvious one. What's the best band that you've worked with?
That's a really, really difficult question.
Assuming none of them are listening right now.
Yeah. It's the best band I've ever worked with. Well, the thing is, I mean, they've all been amazing. I've been really lucky. I've worked with lots of different genres and lots of different styles of music. I think I really, really loved working with the Noisettes because the lead singer was just the most amazing performer. She'd hang off balconies, she'd climb up PA systems. We were all at one stage, everybody on the entire crew was under 30. So we had the time of our lives doing that tour. And it was very, very exciting to mix and to watch. I remember hiding behind the desk because I couldn't bear to watch her. I thought she was going to fall off the balcony because she was dangling. The tour manager was holding her legs from underneath and she was hanging, blown back over the balcony.
Love it. Another interesting question that's come from a student. Is it stressful being a live sound engineer, or are there any moments where you think you're going to mess up during a show? Yeah,
it's very, I wouldn't say stressful, because I mean, I think stressful is like heart surgery or something, but I think, there's certainly high stakes adrenaline when the band first walks out at the headline London show that's been built up to for the whole tour, or the first time I ever put the choir through a PA in front of an audience, when you're worried about it's going to, there's obviously there's major feedback issues with having that many open condenser mics on a stage. So I think it's the adrenaline factor, but that's what I love, and I miss that at festivals.
Excellent. I think that's pretty much it for questions at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I've just got a couple of bits in terms of wrapping up. really. Are there, obviously you're at Shaw today to talk on a panel about women in industry and things, but are there any kind of societies or suggestions that's of sort of memberships or societies that students might want to kind of investigate in terms of whether female or male students trying to get into the industry that you could recommend? I mean, I thought about, like, there's the Sound Girls, there's women in music.
Yeah, they're the two tough, particularly for female. There's obviously the bigger organisations like the PSA, the Tour Production Group. I just think, now we've got everything on social media. I think it's following the manufacturers that you're interested in, following their Twitters, and they're open to engagement all the time. This whole thing with Shaw today has come about because of women in live music pushing that agenda. Obviously, Shaw have been supportive. They've been incredibly supportive of me prior to that. So I think, it's getting out there, and don't be afraid to reach out to people and, comment on their Facebook and Instagram posts and just ask questions and engage. Basically, it's all out there to the taking nowadays. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And is there, just as a final sort of parting thing, is there one tip to end all tips that you could give everybody who wants to become a live sound engineer in the industry? What should they do next? What should they do today?
I would say, don't be afraid to go and do anything on tour in terms of like anything menial that even if you've got no interest in it. Just try to be around touring. So go and work on your local crew. Go and help with catering, help with the t-shirts, go and steward at festivals. I did all those jobs, I had no interest in doing, but I knew that it was a means to an end, because nothing beats just being around that and just being able to, even just over, from a distance, see somebody doing a sound check and see how the processes work. And it just enables you to be able to kind of like talk the talk a bit, even if you've not actually worked in the role that you want to work in. And also, I think, PA companies, is working with PA companies rather than trying to get in with an artist that may or may not make it. I think if you can go and get work in a PA company, and it's hard graft, there's no doubt about it, but that gets you in at a level where you're mitigating the risk of the artist making it by working for the PA company in the first instance, and when you get a huge amount of experience, even if you're just in a warehouse building racks of processing or outboard or checking, line checking the desk works, you're around it and you're experiencing it. And I think nothing beats just getting hands-on face time with the gear and the protocol, basically.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. And it seems like the perfect way to end. So, I'm sure everyone's probably giving a virtual round of applause, but thank you ever so much for joining us,
No
Brian.
problem.
If you wouldn't mind staying online just for a bit, we just ask a couple of questions, but we'll end it there. Thank you for joining us, all the students who've been online and everything. Thanks for your questions. Don't forget to engage in the rest of Industry Week. There's still time to book onto extra slots and things like that for other events. So check out the Industry Week website. Okay, thank you very much.